right, there are three Korean artworks that I'm going to go over. So the first one is Portrait of Sin Sukju from 15th century. This is a hanging scroll. So this is also ink and color on silk. Now I'd write that it is from Korea. All right, so some context about the time. This was created during the Joseon dynasty. And this dynasty, one of the things they're known for is instituting Neo-Confucianism. So what that is, it's a movement in religious philosophy that is derived from Confucianism in response to the ideas of Taoism and Buddhism. So it's kind of combining all these different ideas together. And then we kind of mentioned Neo-Confucianism. We talked about Fan Quan's Travelers Among Mountains and Streams. Remember, there's a tiny little people down there. All right, some more context. So Sin Sukju, who this is a portrait of, was a loyal scholar to the Joseon kings, and he later becomes the prime minister. The kings are promoting those who exemplify Neo-Confucianism behavior by creating these portraits. So this is rewarding him with an official portrait. It's also showing how great they are. It's propaganda expressing their power of the royal court by having all of these portraits. Look at all of these great scholars, all of these great individuals who promote our ideas. This also would hang in Sin Sukju's family shrine, and this allows families to show respect to their ancestors. You don't have to add what's in italics in the bottom, but this is why they're rarely found in museum collections, because they remain in family shrines. And this is from Khan Academy. Rendered in the format of a hanging scroll, this painting likely hung within the family shrine to guide the soul in the practice of ancestral worship. In this way, Portrait of Sin Sukju reflected both the honor that he brought to his lineage as a meritorious official, as well as Confucian beliefs about the afterlife. All right, comparing this to other portraits from the same dynasty, the same time, what are some similarities that we're seeing? So the similarities are going to be the portraiture conventions. So what we're seeing, they're all seated in a chair, their feet are on a stool. Can't see it on the one on the right, but they probably are. Where they are wearing an official robe with a gold embroidered badge, and Sin Sukju has peacocks on the badge. We'll talk about that in a bit. His hands are folded inside of his sleeves. His head is slightly turned to the right with one ear showing. They all have that same look, same pose. And they are wearing a hat that shows he has passed the civil service exam, kind of like you guys wear your graduation hat, right? You passed. All right, going back to the idea of portraiture conventions, we can easily relate that to Egypt. We talked about King Menkaure and Queen. They had to be portrayed in a very specific way. Same thing, that's why Queen Hatshepsut looks so masculine, is because those are the conventions of how you depict a pharaoh. They have to wear the false beard. They have to look very stern and masculine. And then we got to Akhenaten with the Amarna period, and it changed everything. And then they went back. All right, content. This reflects an experienced, serious official. The Khan Academy also described wrinkles around his eyes. I guess I can kind of see one there. I couldn't really see them, but the wrinkles are supposed to reflect old wisdom and age. And then the peacocks on his badge are symbols of authority. All right, so let's relate this one to seated scribe, right? What similarities can we make with this Egyptian artwork? And then also easily relatable to the head of a Roman patrician, especially with the idea of wrinkles. Even though they're a lot more visually evident on the sculpture, they're supposed to be evident as well in Sin Sukju's portrait. Maybe in person you could see it better if you went to the shrine. All right, next Korean artwork, Gold and Jade Crown. This one is earlier. I should have done this one first. This is from the Silla Kingdom in Korea, 5th to 6th century metalwork. All right, so some context. This is the burial mound that this crown was found in. It's a double burial mound, one for the king and one for the queen. So the Silla Kingdom believed that death marked the beginning of a new afterlife. So they buried their kings and queens with treasures. Also very relatable to a lot of the earlier cultures we talked about, Etruscan and Egyptian. All right, so this crown was found in the queen's tomb. There was other treasures found in the king's tomb, but there are weapons as well. In the queen's tomb, we found this crown. All right, so some formal characteristics. This is 11-inch high crown. It's pretty large. Oh, there you go, form. 3 vertical projections that are described as being tree-like, and that's what's in the center. So 3 tree-like vertical projections, and then you have 2 antler-like projections on the side. So very much nature inspired. And then there are comma-shaped jade pieces that are kind of dangling or hanging, that are all attached to the top part. And then you have 6 dangling pendants that are symmetrical on either side. Here's a close-up of just the top half. All right, so the Silla kings and queens were also shamans. That's just another word for a spiritual leader. So there's one idea that this could have helped them when interacting with the spiritual world. Another idea for function is this is something that they would have needed in the afterlife, which is why it would be buried with them. So we don't actually know for sure the function. So here's some 2 possible ideas. All right, this is, I think I have the last thing I have for this piece. Buddhism spread from China to Korea, which brought an end to these elaborate burial traditions. So cremation is what replaced these burial tombs. And then craftsmen then, instead of creating these treasures for their tombs, they then focused on creating images of Buddha and Bodhisattvas. Yep, China spread Korea. And then we can relate this to the African golden stool. How can you relate this? What can you think of? All right, and then just some quick revisiting of this contemporary Korean artist, Summer Trees by Song Soo-nam. So I'm just going to go through this pretty quick. All right, the South Korean people hungered for an art that expressed a Korean identity rooted in its history and traditions. That's upside down. All right, broad vertical parallel brushstrokes of ink. Ink blends and bleeds, a palette of velvety blacks and diluted grays. It all has very feathery edges. Some stripes are pale washes applied to very wet paper where it kind of bleeds out. You can see that on the bottom. While the darkest appear as streaks that show both ink and paper were nearly dry. So this would be where the ink is dry. Only a practiced hand could control ink with such simplicity and impact. All right, so relate this to Fan Kwan's Travelers Among Mountains and Streams with the monochromatic ink tones. Summer Trees suggest the natural world landscapes, which was a tradition that emerges in China and spreads into Korea. Hey, Korea. This reflected the Taoist practice of seeking serenity and oneness with nature. Traditional Korean art has natural forms, surface decoration, and bold colors. Also an example of an awareness of contemporary art practice in America, which we have not talked about Helen Frankenthaler's painting yet, but this painting is very relatable to Summer Trees. Abstract expressionist color field painting is calmer and more meditative. And we'll hear this.
In the course. So why do you think I put these 2 works together? What do they have in common? Well, the artist of the work on the left is Korean, not Chinese, but ink wash or literati painting was very popular in Korea as well as China. As you'll hear soon, Korean art was in general heavily influenced by developments in China. This artist was quite deliberately using traditional Asian ink wash methods, that is the 20th century artist, even though the work also reflects the influence of 20th century abstract art. Song Soo-nam was a leader of Korea's Sumukwa, or Oriental ink movement in the 1980s. That term is the Korean pronunciation of the Chinese word for ink wash painting, also called literati painting. I think maybe the College Board will ask you to draw a connection. I would not bet against it.
All right, that is all.